The weight of the velvet dress was a comfort against Talia's skin, a deep emerald armor for the battlefield of a blind date. She paused just inside the doors of Aurelia, letting the hostess's practiced smile wash over her without really seeing it. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed confidence, the low murmur of conversation, the discreet clink of heavy silverware on porcelain, the scent of money and seared scallops. Her friends, the architects of this evening, had called it a networking opportunity, a chance to meet a potential patron for the small, perpetually struggling art gallery she curated. Talia knew better. She knew the glint in Brenda's eye. It was a setup, but hope was a stubborn, foolish thing. She gave her name, and the hostess, with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, gestured toward a secluded table in the back. As Talia walked, she felt the familiar prickle of eyes on her.
She was used to it.
A big woman, a black woman, moving through a space like this, a space designed for quiet, thin elegance. She carried her body with a curator's precision, her posture straight, her chin up. She had learned long ago that apology was an invitation for contempt. Then she saw them, Brenda and two others, tucked into a booth not 20 feet from her destination, their faces alight with the cruel, bright glee of a joke landing perfectly. They raised their champagne flutes in a silent, mocking toast. The blood drained from Talia's face, leaving a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. This wasn't just a setup. It was a spectator sport. The patron was the punchline, and she was the delivery system. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that threatened to buckle her knees. Her first instinct was to turn, to walk out with as much dignity as she could muster and spend the next week deleting their numbers from her phone. But their laughter, a high, thin sound that cut through the restaurant's decorum, caught her. It pinned her in place. Running was what they wanted. It was the confirmation they sought, that she was ashamed, that she agreed with their unspoken assessment of her worth. That is when she made the mistake of looking at her table. At him. He wasn't what she'd expected. She'd pictured someone soft, awkward, perhaps, or comically ill-suited to the venue. The man sitting there was none of those things. He was a statue carved from shadow and stillness. His suit was a dark, severe charcoal, tailored with surgical precision. It wasn't just expensive, it was a statement of absolute control. His hands rested on the white linen, one on either side of a glass of water, utterly motionless. They were elegant hands, long-fingered, but they held a latent power that was deeply unsettling. He watched her approach, his eyes following her every step. They were dark, polished obsidian, holding no warmth, no welcome, only a flat, analytical calm. A fine, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only flaw in a face of sharp, unforgiving angles. He did not smile. He did not stand. He simply watched. Pride, sharp and sudden, lanced through Talia's humiliation.
She would not run.
She would not give Brenda the satisfaction. She walked the final few feet to the table, her steps deliberate, her gaze locked on the man waiting for her. She was an expert in art, in the stories told by color and line. This man was a composition of control and menace, and for some reason, her friends had aimed him at her. She sat down opposite him, the plush chair sighing under her weight. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. From the corner of her eye, she could see Brenda whispering excitedly to the others. "Talia," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You must be Mr. Kim." The man's eyes flickered, a minuscule movement. He did not confirm or deny the name. "You are late," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and devoid of accent, yet each word was weighted, deliberate. "The traffic was unpredictable," she lied. Brenda chose that moment to let out a particularly loud, staged laugh. "I can't believe she actually sat down," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Someone should tell her the whale exhibit is at the aquarium, not here." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Talia's hands clenched into fists in her lap, her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the sting of tears she refused to shed. She did not look at them. She kept her eyes on the man across from her. His expression had not changed, but something in the quality of his stillness had. It had gone from passive to predatory. He slowly lifted his gaze from her face and turned it, with an unnerving lack of haste, toward Brenda's table. The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't speak. He simply looked. And in that look, the entire atmosphere of the restaurant shifted. The ambient warmth bled away, replaced by a crystalline cold. Brenda's smile froze, then slid from her face. The other women shifted, their laughter dying in their throats. It was as if a wolf had looked up from its meal to notice the chattering of squirrels. He held their gazes for a long, terrifying moment before speaking. His voice was no louder than before, but it sliced through the room with the lethal precision of a scalpel. "The next person at that table who makes a sound," he said, his words perfectly enunciated, "will be escorted out through the service alley. I cannot promise they will leave in a single piece." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. A promise. Brenda and her friends went pale. They fumbled for their purses, throwing cash onto the table with trembling hands. They didn't walk to the exit. They fled, their eyes wide with a terror Talia couldn't begin to comprehend. They didn't look back. The restaurant manager, a man who had exuded unflappable European charm moments before, was suddenly at their table, bowing from the waist. His face was slick with sweat. "Mr. Kwan," he stammered, his voice thin. "My deepest apologies. It will not happen again. Your privacy is our utmost concern."
Kwan.
Not Kim. So, her friends hadn't even bothered to get his name right. Talia watched the manager back away, still bowing, and a new kind of fear, colder and more profound than simple humiliation, began to settle over her. This man wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just intimidating. He commanded a primal fear in people. And she was sitting at his table. "My name is Kwon Ji-hoon," he said, his attention returning to her as if the entire incident had been a minor distraction, like swatting a fly. "And you are not the person I was scheduled to meet tonight." "No," Talia said, finding her voice. "I don't imagine I was." She should have been terrified. A part of her was. But another part, the part that had stared down condescending gallery owners and dismissive critics, was intrigued. "It seems my acquaintances arranged this as a practical joke. Their sense of humor is poor," Ji-hoon observed, his gaze analytical. "And their survival instincts are worse." He gestured to her untouched water glass. "You should have left with them, and give them the satisfaction?" The words were out before she could stop them.
No.
"Thank you." A flicker of something, not amusement, but perhaps interest, moved in his dark eyes. "Pride," he stated. "A dangerous luxury." "So is a bad sense of humor, apparently," she countered. For the first time, the corner of his mouth tilted, a bare millimeter of movement that was not quite a smile. The tension in the air eased, just slightly. The waiter appeared, silent and efficient, to take their order. Ji-hoon ordered for them both without consulting her, a dry-aged steak for himself and a pan-seared branzino for her, with a bottle of wine she knew cost more than her monthly rent. He seemed to know what she would want before she did. It was either incredibly perceptive or incredibly arrogant. With him, she suspected the two were intertwined. As they ate in a silence that was no longer entirely hostile, he asked, "What do you do, Talia?" He said her name differently than anyone else had. It wasn't soft. It was precise, an object he had picked up and examined before speaking its name. "I'm an art curator," she said, "for a small contemporary gallery downtown." His stillness returned, but it was different now.
It was charged.
He set his fork down with a quiet click. "Art," he repeated, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. "You're not a fan?" "I knew someone," he said, his gaze distant, fixed on a point over her shoulder. She had a passion for it, for the stories behind the canvas. She said it was the only honest thing in a world of lies. His voice was flat, but Talia heard the ghost of an old pain in it. That passion made her a liability. It was the first crack in the marble facade. A glimpse of a wound, old and deep. Before she could process it, to ask what he meant, two men entered the restaurant. They were dressed in expensive but ill-fitting suits, their shoulders too broad, their necks too thick. They did not look at the menu or the hostess. Their eyes swept the room, cold and professional, and landed on their table. On Ji-hoon. Then, their gaze shifted to her. Ji-hoon saw them without turning his head. His entire body went taut. The air grew cold again. He placed his napkin on the table, a signal of finality. A man materialized behind him, a bodyguard who had been invisible until this exact moment, and whispered something in Korean. Ji-hoon's eyes met Talia's across the table. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was laced with an urgency that sent a chill down her spine. The dinner is over. You need to leave.
Now.
Go out the front door, get in a taxi, and do not look back. Forget you ever met me. It was an order.
And it was an out.
A chance to run back to her life, to the safety of her quiet gallery and her small apartment. She should have taken it. But the two men by the door were still looking at her. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were watching her. She had been marked, tainted by association. Walking out the front door alone suddenly felt like the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. Her survival instinct, honed by years of navigating a world not built for her, screamed a single, clear message. The monster you know is safer than the one you don't. She looked at Kwon Ji-hoon, at the lethal certainty in his eyes. She made a deliberate choice. No, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I don't think I will. His expression didn't change, but she felt the shift in him. It was the moment he started to see her as something other than a civilian caught in the crossfire. His bodyguard gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod.
Yeon stood.
This way. He didn't offer his hand. He simply turned and walked toward a door marked private, expecting her to follow.
She did.
He led her into a narrow, dimly lit service corridor. The sounds of the restaurant faded behind them, replaced by the hum of a commercial freezer. He moved with a liquid grace that was unnervingly silent. As they navigated the tight space, she was suddenly pressed against him, the hard wall of his chest against her back, the crisp wool of his suit jacket scratching her bare arm. His hand settled on the small of her back, a firm, possessive weight. It wasn't a caress, it was a claim, a way of guiding and controlling her movements. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to his cold demeanor. His cologne filled her senses, cedar and something else, something like cold smoke. For a breathless moment, trapped between him and the wall, she was aware of nothing but his proximity. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he spoke, his voice a low vibration. Stay close. Do not make a sound. She could only nod, her heart hammering against her ribs. That was the moment everything changed. This was no longer about a cruel joke or a powerful man. This was about survival. The back door opened onto a clean, private parking garage. A black sedan, sleek and silent as a shark, idled by the curb. The bodyguard opened the back door, and Ji-hoon guided her inside before sliding in beside her. The door clicked shut, encasing them in a world of tinted glass and expensive leather. The silence inside the car was more profound than any she had ever experienced. It was the silence of a tomb. The car pulled out into the city streets, the vibrant chaos of the night flashing by in a silent, blurry stream. She was in a stranger's car, a dangerous man's car, being driven to an unknown destination. She should have been screaming, panicking. Instead, a strange, crystalline calm settled over her. She had made her choice in the restaurant. Now she had to live with it. Where are we going? She asked, her voice sounding small in the vast quiet. Somewhere safe, he replied, not looking at her. His attention was on the side mirrors, his jaw tight. That was when she saw it. A dark SUV, weaving through traffic behind them with an aggressive, predatory intent. It was keeping pace. Safe seems to be a relative term, she murmured. Ji-hoon didn't answer. He spoke in rapid, low Korean to his driver. The sedan's engine growled, and they surged forward, pressing Talia back into her seat. The city lights became a frantic smear of neon. The SUV behind them accelerated, closing the distance. A sickening lurch threw her against him as the SUV rammed their rear bumper. The sound was a dull, metallic thud that vibrated through the frame of the car. Talia gasped, her hands flying to the dashboard to brace herself. Ji-hoon's arm shot out, not to comfort, but to steady her, his hand clamping down on her shoulder like a steel vise. He was an anchor of calm in the chaos, his body utterly rigid, his focus absolute. The driver was a master, swerving down a narrow side street, tires squealing in protest. The SUV followed, relentless. Another impact, harder this time, sent them skidding toward a row of parked cars. Talia's world tilted, a kaleidoscope of brick walls and flashing headlights. Through it all, Ji-hoon remained preternaturally still, his grip on her shoulder the only thing keeping her grounded. He was a creature of violence, moving through it like it was his natural element. Their driver wrenched the wheel, executing a turn that seemed to defy physics, and shot into the mouth of an underground garage. A heavy steel gate slammed down behind them, cutting off the pursuit with a deafening clang. They were plunged into the echoing concrete silence of the garage. Talia's breath came in ragged gasps. Adrenaline sang through her veins, a high, frantic hum. She looked at Ji-hoon. He was already on his phone, his voice a quiet, lethal stream of Korean. He showed no sign of fear, no relief. This was simply a problem that had been handled. He ended the call and finally looked at her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was perfunctory, a box to be checked. "No," she managed, her voice trembling slightly. "Just processing." "There'll be time for that later," he said and got out of the car. They took a private elevator that opened directly into his penthouse. The door slid open to reveal a space that was less a home and more a monument to cold, hard power. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a panoramic, breathtaking view of the city, a carpet of glittering lights laid out at their feet. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and unwelcoming. Black leather, chrome, and glass. There were no photographs, no books, no clutter. Not a single piece of art adorned the vast, white walls. It was the home of a man who owned everything and cherished nothing. One of his men was waiting for them, his head bowed. He spoke in low tones to Ji-hoon, gesturing toward a closed door off the main living area. Ji-hoon's expression hardened. "Wait here," he ordered Talia and walked toward the door. She couldn't stay still. She drifted toward the massive windows, wrapping her arms around herself. Below, the city was alive, oblivious. Her gallery, her apartment, her entire life was down there. It felt a million miles away. A world she could no longer access. A noise from behind the closed door made her flinch. A low grunt of pain, followed by the sharp, wet sound of a fist hitting flesh. Her blood ran cold. She knew what was happening in that room. Interrogation. Torture. And she was here. A witness. An accomplice in a way. The door opened. Ji-hoon emerged, wiping his knuckles with a pristine white handkerchief. There was no blood on him, but she knew there was blood in that room. He saw her standing by the window, her face pale. The captured man, one of the rivals from the restaurant, was dragged out by two of Ji-hoon's soldiers. His face was a mess of bruises and blood. As they pulled him past, his one good eye found Talia. A broken, bloody smile split his lips. "The curator," he spat, his voice thick with blood. "He always goes for the artists. Just like with Min Seo. He'll get you killed too. We'll make sure of it." The name, Min Seo, hung in the air. The woman he'd failed to protect. The one whose passion had been a liability. The threat wasn't just about him anymore. They knew who she was. They knew her profession. They had made it personal. Talia looked from the broken man to Ji-hoon. His face was a mask of ice, but a storm raged in his eyes. He was going to kill this man. She could see it. The part of her that curated art, that believed in order and beauty, was screaming in horror. But the part of her that had just been run off the road, the part that had a name and a face in an enemy's mouth, was cold with a fury she had never known. She met Ji-hoon's gaze. "Do what you have to do," she said, her voice low and steady. She had just sanctioned violence. She had just crossed a line she could never, ever uncross. The moral ground she had stood on her entire life had crumbled away, and she was falling. Ji-hoon studied her, his head tilted slightly. He had expected her to scream, to cry, to beg for the man's life. He had not expected this cold, hard resolve. He gave a sharp nod to his men. They dragged the man away. The silence that descended was heavy with what she had done. Later, after the apartment was quiet again, they stood by the window, the city lights a silent witness. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind an exhaustion that was bone deep. "No one," he said, his voice quiet, almost rough, "has ever looked at my world and not run." Talia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the glittering expanse below. "I'm still trying to decide if I'm running toward something," she admitted, the words tasting like ash and truth, or away from it. It was not a confession of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was an admission of entanglement, of a shared fate she hadn't chosen, but was now refusing to escape. He moved to stand beside her, his shoulder almost brushing hers. "Their leader is Lee Jae-hwan," he said, his voice flat and informational, but she understood he was giving her a piece of himself, a piece of his war. "His brother was loyal to me. I had to remove him. Lee blames me. He also knows about Min Seo. She was an art dealer. He sees you as a way to wound me, a symbol." Talia finally turned to look at him. "Am I?" she asked. "A symbol?" His gaze was intense, searching. "You were supposed to be a joke," he said. "A pawn in a pathetic game. Lee thinks you are my weakness. A repeat of a past mistake." "And what do you think?" she pressed, needing to know. "I think," he said, taking a step closer, closing the small gap between them, "that everyone has underestimated you, including me." The next few days passed in a blur of luxurious confinement. Ji-hoon did not let her leave the penthouse. He bought her clothes, food, anything she needed, all delivered by silent men with watchful eyes. Her old life felt like a dream. The gallery, her colleagues, the quiet rhythm of her days.
Gone.
Erased. One evening, he came to her with a tablet. On the screen was a live security feed of her gallery. "There is a private showing tonight," he said, "for a new installation. Lee will expect you to be there. He will see it as the perfect opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" she asked, though she already knew. "To take you," he said simply. "To use you to draw me out. So, it's a trap." "Yes," Ji-hoon agreed. "But the bait does not have to be helpless." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a question in his eyes. He was giving her a choice. Hide or fight back. She thought of Brenda's mocking laughter. She thought of the man in the car, trying to run her off the road. She thought of the cold, dismissive world that had always seen her as a punchline, a decoration, an obstacle. "The main exhibit room has a loading bay behind the west wall," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The new sculpture is kinetic. It's made of 15-foot steel plates, counterweighted. I know the emergency stop sequence. I can trap someone in there if I have to." A slow, dangerous smile touched Kwon Ji-hoon's lips. It transformed his face. "Show me." The gallery was a sea of polite chatter and clinking glasses. Talia moved through the crowd, a ghost in her own life. She wore a simple black dress Ji-hoon had procured, elegant and anonymous. She could feel the eyes of his men on her, hidden among the guests, the catering staff, the security. Ji-hoon was here too, somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting. The attack came with brutal efficiency. Two of Lee's men, disguised as waiters, moved toward her. It happened fast, but she was ready. Instead of screaming or running toward the exit, she ran deeper into the gallery, toward the main installation. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed. Ji-hoon's men moved to intercept, the sounds of a suppressed firefight echoing between the sculptures. Talia reached the massive kinetic piece. One of Lee's men was right behind her, his hand reaching for her arm. She didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the emergency control panel, inputting the sequence she had memorized. With a deep groan of metal, the massive steel plates began to shift, rearranging themselves. The man pursuing her was forced to leap back as a 10-ton slab of polished steel slammed down where he had been standing, blocking the path.
He was trapped.
She didn't wait to see the result. She slipped through a service door she knew led to the archives, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had not been rescued. She had acted. She had changed the outcome. In the aftermath, the gallery was a wreck. Shattered glass littered the floor like diamonds. A sculpture lay toppled on its side. The air smelled of cordite and fear. Ji-hoon found her in the quiet of the archive, standing among the ghosts of her old life. He walked toward her, his eyes missing nothing, not the way she held herself, poised and unbroken, nor the single, angry scratch on her cheek from a shattered frame. He stopped in front of her, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the line of the scratch, his touch surprisingly soft. "They thought you were my weakness," he said, his voice a low, rough thing she felt in her bones. A vulnerability they could exploit. He looked around the ruined gallery, at the life she had lost because of him. Then his eyes came back to hers, fierce and possessive. "They are wrong. You are my reason." The words settled in the space between them, more binding than any vow. This was his confession, his claim. "This world, my world, has a cost," he continued, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I can give you a new life. A gallery in Paris, a quiet existence in Tuscany. Money, safety. You would never have to see me or this life again. You would be free." It was the choice she should have wanted. The escape. The return to normalcy, or a gilded version of it. She looked at the ruin of her gallery, the tangible evidence of the life he had destroyed. She thought of its quiet beauty, the satisfaction of her work. That life was gone. Then she looked at him.
Kwon Ji-hoon.
A man of violence and shadows, of lethal stillness and unexpected confessions. A man who saw her, not as a joke or a liability, but as a reason. She didn't answer him with words. The choice was too big, too terrifying for language. Instead, she took a single step forward, closing the final inch of distance between them. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers, strong and sure, closed around hers, a silent, irrevocable pact. The wreckage of her past surrounded them, but in his grasp, she felt the terrifying, thrilling promise of a future she never could have imagined.